we'd have our sales team reach back out to them to see, how they're doing. And an overwhelming amount don't exist anymore. It's nice to have a business where obviously I'm up super early and up late with different time zones, but I always get to have breakfast and dinner with my family. The spiraling up the way is if we have a good cash flow, we have a good margin, we're able to hire the better people, we're either to have better equipment, and ultimately you produce a better outcome.
G'day, constructing artists. I'm Kenny from MyCladders, and this is the Constructing Art Podcast. Today, I've got an interview with a man that has a podcast of his own that he calls You Constructing Legends, which I thought was really, really cool. From that, his name is Cian Brennan. He is the CEO of a company called Quantum Contract Solutions. Cian was on the dark side, which is the client side of construction, for almost 2 decades. Over this time, he saw hundreds and hundreds of construction companies being bullied contractually, losing money and going out of business. In 2019, after becoming deeply concerned with the state of the industry and having inside knowledge of how clients manage their contractors, Cian started Quantum to help constructing contractors, like myself, not go out of business. Fast forward to today, Cian has won a 40 Under 40 award, a Best of Business award for innovation and outstanding growth, and a finalist for Entrepreneur of the Year in the CEO magazine and business newspaper. I think we could all be very, very excited with that, Cian. Quantum, Cian's company, being on the coalface and having deep knowledge regarding to the risks that are being applied to construction companies, he deals with their payment issues, disputes and insolvencies, giving Cian a unique insight into what's really going on in the construction industry. Cian's company has the data and can seek impacts on the construction industry before the issues reach the mainstream. And due to the large number of companies that Cian works with, he can see what companies contractually and strategically, but what works contractually and strategically, and more importantly, what doesn't. Cian, what a rap sheet, and welcome to our podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if we're doing video here as well as podcast or just audio, but I think the viewers should take note of your amazing Hawaiian shirt that you have on. It's very cool.
Thank you. It's actually a trademark. I'm a big supporter of it's for mental health. It's to start a conversation, and a couple of local Brisbane boys put that together, and you can get these. And on you'll see me walking around in these crazy, I call them an Aussie Hawaiian shirt. So good to see you pick that one up.
Yeah, it's cool. I like them. An Aussie Hawaiian shirt. There's kind of a mix of cultures there, all in one. Pretty cool.
Yes. So today you're going to be giving us some information on how we can, as contractors, can not go out of business, essentially, with the power of contracts.
Yeah. So just to kind of chunk up a level, I'd like to say. So it is just if we have a conversation about the industry in general. And so construction typically is quite behind other industries, IT, pharma, just all of the more advanced things. They're ahead of us in business structures, business systems, technology, and construction is pretty low to adopt new technology, okay? Apart from machinery and automation and stuff, obviously. And so while that is the truth, it's starting to catch up. And so what that means in the industry over the last 10 or 15 years is that your average construction company, your average main contractor, general contractor, has gotten far more advanced in their corporate governance processes. And so while they have gotten more advanced, they've gotten companies like McKinsey, Bain, all of these PwC consultants to come in and advise on strategy. And so strategy has changed from, dishing out fair contracts to subcontractors to pushing all the risk down the line contractually. And so now we're in a situation where it's changed so much that relationships have changed in construction. That used to be quite a relationship-based industry. Now it's a lot more legal and contractually based. And so you can find yourself in this problem where the guys who have the least resources to be able to handle complex contracts, subcontractors typically, have the worst contract in the whole chain. So you got the owner at the top, you got the main contractor, general contractor, then you got your subcontractors, trade partners, whatever you call them around the world. It always changes. And so that means that the subcontractors now all of a sudden have this additional risk that they didn't have maybe 15 plus years ago. And that is massive. And so the impact of that additional risk on them is companies are going out of business. And the construction industry stats at the moment are, well, the stats generally are 26% of all insolvencies come from the construction industry, full stop.
Wow.
And secondly, the amount of insolvencies and companies going out of business in the last quarter, never mind the last year, has been the highest since before the GFC. So right. More than, it kind of tracks up again, more than like about 15 years ago, roughly. And so that is important. And subcontractors now need to understand their contracts and the impacts of risk on their contracts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely. 100%. I get what you're saying. Yes.
Okay. So what a lot of problems that they have is that a lot of subcontractors are of the impression that if I try to negotiate, I'm going to lose the work. And so they don't negotiate and they just sign on the dotted line. And if what that puts you in a position is if things do not go perfectly, that you're putting your whole company at significant risk and a big risk of losing money, not getting paid. And if that does happen as well, that ultimately you end up in a situation where you have very little recourse and you go out of business. And another thing that we're seeing at the moment is main contractors, general contractors are going out of business too. And so you might have performed the work perfectly, but now they don't have the cash flow to pay you. And then you're in trouble as well in that way. So there are a lot of the problems that are happening in the industry at the moment. And there's different ways that we can look at tackling each of those problems.
Yeah, look, I've been someone on both sides of that, from having a builder go bankrupt on us and our ability to submit payment claims on time or not correctly to the contract, to the point where now, and we lost significant amount of money to the size of our business, where now in our business, we make sure that component never happens again. However, there still is the risk of builders going out of business, and those things you talk about in making sure that all of our ducks are in a row, so that if something happens, it's not going to shut us down, because 1 month's worth of, say we're doing a $500,000 contract and 1 month is $250,000 claim, that can cripple us really quickly if they do not make their payment.
Yeah, 100%. And so it's not just, so we talk about contracts a lot, right? Because really the contracts are incredibly important to the financial health of your business. And so understanding what each clause in the contract means is very, very important on how it impacts you. Now, what we kind of don't want to do is we don't want to negotiate your contracts where you go through each line and maybe like a lawyer would do and try and tear out everything. We want to figure out what actually makes a difference to your business from a risk perspective, and how can we reduce it as much as possible while still obviously taking on a risk of the project itself, but having it at a level that and there's two key people. There's a book called from Keith Cunningham called The Road Less Stupid. Very good book for anyone if they want to have a read. And also Warren Buffett, whom we all know, and they both talk about the downside risk. And so most people think about the upside opportunity, which is great. Of course, the upside opportunity, but really, most businesses will trend upwards over time, slowly. And if you're doing a good job, which most people would like to be doing, that's how your company grows over time. And so we did an analysis of our clients and what makes the successful client successful. And one of the things is, obviously, the longer that they've been in business, the bigger they are. And so how do we optimize to stay in business a long, long time? The goal of business is not to start a business. The goal of business is to stay in business. And so if that's the goal, if we know we can stay in a business a long time, we will grow naturally over time. So then it becomes, and all the big companies understand this, right? That's why main contractors, general contractors have armies of contracts and lawyers on their team. They understand that the downside risk is more important in that if something goes wrong, so the example that you gave with a builder going out of business, or you know, anything similar to that, if something goes wrong, we don't want that thing that goes wrong to put you out of business. We want the thing that goes wrong to have a little dip, and then you can continue your upward trajectory. But if that is, you have an upward trajectory and then all of a sudden you have this massive crash that sets you back five years, then you grow again and it might happen again, and you never actually get out of that cycle. So what we're trying to do is, over a longer period of time, is to stay in business, and when the bad thing happens is just have a little dip and then you go on and you grow again. A little dip and then you go on and you grow again. That's the way the companies that have been around for a long time stay in business. Now, the subcontracting industry, even though it appears to be quite risky, is actually better than the main contractor industry. And let me explain why. So a lot of people talk about payments and stuff, and there's obviously tons of strategies to get paid, and I'm happy to chat about that later on. But from a business model point of view, your general contractor, main contractor are essentially a finance company. So they will get a loan from a bank. First of all, they'll win the work from the client. They'll get a loan from the bank to fund the project, to subcontract out all the work to the subcontractors. And they make money from the delta between the money they get from the client and the repayments back to the bank. That's how they make money. So essentially, they're a finance company, if you think about it. Okay. But they don't actually do construction. Most of those larger companies. And so they're only worth the projects they have on their books. And obviously, the risk is high to them when interest rates go up, which is what's happening now, and projects not being delivered. That's their risk. And that's why they are really suffering right now. The subcontracting model is actually, while you're further down the chain of getting paid, which isn't good, without a doubt, your business model is better in that you supply one thing to one person more often than not, and you have systems and processes to do that one thing. You typically have assets and you have equipment. So as a valuation from a company, it is a much better model. You just have to get over that payment hurdle. And if you look at some of the largest construction companies in the world that have been around a long time, it isn't main contractors, right? And there are obviously some that have been around, like Turner in the States, obviously is one of those ones that's been around for a long time. But most of the large construction companies that have been in business are subcontractors, like steel fabrication companies that have been around since the 1920s, 30s, or other different companies. They've been around long. So how did they do it? And they do it the way that I'm saying, it's minimizing your downside risk. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, if you minimize risk from any investment, if you see everything I see everything as an investment when it comes to a project. Yep. So if everyone's looking at it as an investment, you want to minimize that risk. So you're completely. Yep. Yeah. And
so if we're trying to break it down, how can we be a successful construction company, and break it into three different elements, right? So the first element is, well, okay, I'm not going to talk about delivery of a great product, right? So I'm not an expert in cladding. Right, you are. So you know how to deliver a great product, but that is what most construction companies only focus on, is that particular thing. And so that is great, because if you do a great job, you're going to get referred work, you're going to get additional work, and have a great reputation. That is a part of the puzzle. The next part of the puzzle is the risk. So negotiating your construction contract, and then in the post-award phase, managing that well. That's very, very important, because that will minimize your downside risk. And then the next thing I want to talk about is cash flow. So most construction companies don't die of starvation. They die of indigestion, which means their cash flow gets restricted and restricted and restricted and restricted until they can't pay anyone anymore and they go out of business. So no one goes pop. Most people go out with a bit of a whimper, slowly, like that.
Just hanging on.
Hanging on. So what we want to do in that scenario is, how can we structure our business in such a way that doesn't happen? How can we structure our business as a high cash flow business? And so if we look to some of the biggest suppliers in the industry, or if we look at Siemens and GE. Okay. So these guys are just huge. If you think about it, they're absolutely massive suppliers in the construction industry. They do turbines and oil and gas stuff as well, but that's not really what I want to concentrate on is their business model. And so their business model is, you want to purchase this thing off me. And so I want a massive down payment. Then I will go and produce the thing. And then you pay me the rest of the money in milestones as we go. And then I have a maintenance contract for this thing for 20 or 30 years, right? That is the best way to structure your business model. If you can move from where you are now, which is probably, I'll perform the service and you'll pay me 60 days later, if you think about it. So I'll do the service, we'll wait till the end of the month, whereas I give you my invoice, and then there's 30 days. So really it's 60 days. And so you have to fund it for 60 days, right? Whereas in the GE model, you get paid up front. So your cash flow is immediately high. So you're able to cash flow the project, and you get paid in milestones as you go through. And then so your cash flow is high the whole way through. As part of that, going back to the post-award phase of contracts, if you're really good with your contracts, you're getting your variations, change orders across the line, EOTs across the line, you're going to get paid quicker, and that's going to help with the cash flow thing as well. That's very, very important. So if we can get the risk down, as I said, and then we can work on your business model to change it, so you're asking, you're changing it so you get more money up front and you get more money splattered in the middle, rather than having to wait for your profit, which is a 10% retention in a year's time, which is your 10% margin, which most construction companies are in. We can structure it slightly differently. Then you're going to be way better at it. All the best construction companies do this. And so how do we, if you're just a regular subcontractor, how do you start implementing that model, or how do you start moving towards that model? One is to ask for prepayments, very simply. And there's lots of different reasons where you can ask for a prepayment. One is you can say, the market is the way it is. I need to secure materials. I need to secure people. If you give us a prepayment, I'm going to be able to do that. I'm going to deliver a better product for you, right? So you put it in as a line item. This is what we need. A lot of people, if they're smart, they will think, yeah, that's a good idea, because that is the case in the market at the moment. The second way is you can offset it against the total value of the contract. You can say, if you give me a prepayment of this much, I'll knock a percentage off the total contract value. And your game for that would be trying to make up that margin via changes and as the project goes on, which is how to go about doing it. So that's kind of how you manipulate the business model. So if you can change your business model to suit that, you will be able to have way better cash flow, and you'll be doing those two things. You'll have reduced your risk, so you're going to stay in business longer. You can have better cash flow, so you're going to stay in business longer, and you're basically shoehorning yourself into staying in business for a much longer period of time.
Yeah, well, it seems so simple. And the whole fear of asking a head contractor for those things, especially when you're in the box seat for the job. You're at the post-tender part and you go, well, we cross lines off, we know we haven't included this, but to go and say, hey, how about 20% up front, or a discount from that, and then working it back, that just seems, you make it seem like that's what I should have been doing for the whole time.
It's obviously, these things are, the concept is simple. But the implementation to get there might be harder, or might be out of your area of comfort. And so, I was talking to two CEOs that are clients of ours, or managing directors or whatever, general managers, whatever they're called in their company. And I was, on a call. It was the same day, and I was on a call with one CEO, and I go, have you ever tried to ask for a prepayment? And he's like, yeah, I've been doing that for years. Right. And I how often does it work? And he goes, yeah, every time. We get it every time. Same industry, same type of company. Chat to the next guy, and he's like, no, they'll never accept that. No, we don't ask for that. I never accept it. So a lot of it is the perception of what you can actually get away with. And one of the things that I want to really emphasize, particularly, this is more of a business thing than it is construction. But if you are able to have better margins, and you're able to charge more money, and you're able to have better cash flow, which we all want, but we're, for whatever reason, scared to ask for it, lots of different things happen, right? One is when people pay more, they pay attention more, and they value your service more. And so they've done lots and lots of different studies on, they had 3 bottles of wine. They're all the exact same wine, nothing different about them, except they had 3 different price points, and they asked people which was the best one, and almost everyone chose the most expensive one. Same bottle of wine. And so people value what is more expensive. And so again, I had an example of I'm not going to throw, but my wife's sister, was looking for a wedding ring. And we were in Europe one time on a holiday years ago, and they had got engaged, but they said they'd buy the engagement ring when they were in Europe. And so we went around, and as we were on this 3-week holiday, which was very nice at the time, pre-kids, we used to go into jewelers in the different places, and we'd look for this type of ring that she was kind of almost a game. We all knew the type of ring she was looking for. And then in Italy, we found a ring, and she's like, "This is it. This is the ring." And he goes, "How much is it?" And the guy goes, $3,000. And she instantly didn't want it. And the reason she didn't want it is because she wanted it to be 10 times more expensive. Right?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so
if it was $25,000, I have
like,
a $25,000 ring.
Same ring. Yeah. And so that is a concept that people need to understand. So let's just say we get over that and we start charging more for our services. People say, I'm not going to win work, right? And I get that, right? If you're only competitively tendering.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just say you're able to get referred work or repeated work, different acquisition channels. And people know you, they're more expensive, but they're better. And so a lot of clients will opt for that because they think that you're better. And the reality of that scenario, you got what we call the vicious cycle of tendering, which is you're bidding for work, you go lower and lower and lower and lower and lower. And the thing is, there's always someone willing to go out of business quicker than you are. So you go lower,
That's
lower.
my favorite saying of yours, by the way.
Yeah. And then if you over time, you win work, but your margins are smaller because you're competitively bidding all the time, which means that your actual service over time goes down because now you can't afford the best people. You can't afford good people. You can't afford the best equipment. And so your actual deliverable goes down, which means your reputation goes down, and then you stop getting referred work because you actually don't do a great job, right? Mm-hmm. And then you spiral down the way. The spiraling up the way is if we have a good cash flow, we have a good margin, we're able to hire the better people, we're either to have better equipment, and ultimately you produce a better outcome, which means you get into this virtuous cycle where your reputation starts to increase. And because your reputation starts to increase, you can charge more money. And then you start running on that hamster wheel up the way rather than running. The spiraling up the way is if we have a good cash flow, we have a good margin, we're able to hire the better people, we're either to have better equipment, and ultimately you produce a better outcome, which means you get into this virtuous cycle where your reputation starts to increase. And because your reputation starts to increase, you can charge more money. And then you start running on that hamster wheel up the way rather than running on the hamster wheel down the way.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so that's it in a nutshell. It depends on every different type of business is different, but trying to move towards a better business model will make a huge difference.
And Cian, with that and the industry the way that it is right now, I'd imagine that is more imperative, being that, like you said before, since GFC, there's more, let's say, builders going bankrupt or out of business than ever before. And with one going out, a whole heap of people get affected by that. And mm-hmm. I've seen, for example, another roofing company go under in the last year because they had a whole heap of work with one particular builder. Mm-hmm. And that builder went under and they couldn't stand up. And so they've now gone and they work for someone else and they lost. So in that scenario, how could that, I guess, as a business model, and I know we're not necessarily talking about that, but as a business model, you have companies which have all their eggs in one basket. Mm-hmm. They're not going to multiple different revenue streams. Mm-hmm. How could the contracts have helped that person?
In that scenario, so yes. Someone going out of business, well, the contract mightn't have been able to help. Well, there's ways to help that. So one scenario with the contract is you have your termination clause. And in the termination clause, more often than not, it lists all the way that they can terminate you. They can terminate you for convenience, which just for their own reasons, basically. They can terminate you for default, which is you've not done what you said you would do, and they're going to terminate you because of that. That's fine, realistically. The termination for convenience, people might have some issues with, particular scaffolding companies, because they can just get rid of you really quickly and hire someone in who's cheaper. It's less so concerning for people who, they've put stuff in the ground and it's hard to get rid of them from site because it's hard to get someone else in to do the job after. But the actual problem in that clause is a lot of times you don't have a way to terminate them.
Yeah.
And so a scenario that you can find yourself in is month one, they don't pay you for whatever reason.
Yep.
And you can't terminate and get out of the contract. You have to keep working. And now you're going into month two, having not received the income, and now your cash flow is in trouble. Now that's where we're back into the indigestion thing. So then you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you are able to terminate them, let's just say you hear that they are going through financial problems and you're like, oh, I really want to get out of this contract. They don't pay you. You can go, okay, we're terminating the contract for default because you haven't paid us. You were obliged to pay us. You didn't pay us. And then we're gone. And you can get out of the contract fine. You don't, but the other way, if it's not in there, you can't get out of the contract.
So if it's not in the contract, looking at the Payment Act in Australia, how you have to go through a process of notifying them that you're going to stop work because you haven't been paid. There's a whole heap of processes that you have to go through.
Yep.
Yet without, I've had to do that a number of times and walk away from site and lose $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 here and there, and just most of the time we've been able to get it back, but we're risking it because there is no contract. Because a lot of the time we work off a purchase order. And so you give a quote, they give a purchase order, and then you turn up and do the work, and you go, that purchase order is our contract.
Yes.
And we're working basically off the Payment Act, and that's all we're working off.
Well, yeah, that's true. And then that's fine, okay, in itself, because you're working off the Payment Act. So the Act becomes the terms and conditions, essentially. However, a lot of the times where you submit it, this is a real big problem for subcontractors. If we can stop people making this mistake, it'll make a big difference. So you submit a proposal with your terms and conditions, right? And and your inclusions and exclusions. Okay, so that this is another problem I'll talk about. They then issue you with a purchase order over the top of it, right? More often than not, those purchase orders have their terms and conditions on it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a contract and so that one then takes precedence over your contract, and it might be completely different, and it might have different inclusions and exclusions that you haven't accounted for, and then you can find yourself in trouble with that thing. So you got to make sure that doesn't happen. Right. So a purchase order in itself is just a contract. You can negotiate the terms of that contract as well as anything. Okay. So you got to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, in every country, so we're in the States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And so in every country, you've got terms and conditions like here, right? And above it, there is the act, the law, right? And so the contract has to comply with the law, but the contract itself might say all the different things. In this instance, we're gonna do this thing. In this instance, we're gonna do this thing. And so, if we can get what we want into the contract rather than having to rely on the act, then it's much easier for you to press the trigger and just get out, or it's much easier for you to have a recourse, and it's easier for them as well, candidly, to do what they want to do. That's why the contracts are so in their favor. So they want to structure it in such a way that it benefits them.
Yeah, it seems that most of them are done like that.
Almost everyone. So having reviewed almost 4,000 construction contracts and negotiated for like the same, there has been, I can count on my hand the amount of standard contracts, whether it be an Australian standard, New Zealand standard, AIA in the States. You don't see them anymore. The only thing that you do see is they'll use that template that you're familiar with and amend them. And so it looks like what you're used to, but they've amended it they've had a lawyer go through it and amend it to be in their favor.
Well, what I've noticed a lot in most of them is a payment date that needs to be met, like that. So a payment claim date that needs to be met, as well as they have a scope. And almost every single time the scope has things in there that you have to cross off because they can sometimes be a very cookie cutter type of a contract that don't even seem relevant to the trade that we're doing. However, if we leave it in there, contractually, we will be obligated, I'd imagine, to do that if they asked us to.
So what will happen? Well, the scope of work, we got to make sure the scope of work is the exact scope of work of the work that you're doing, right? But each contract has what's called an order of precedence. And so the order of precedence basically says, if there's any ambiguity between the different documents in the contract, this is the order of precedence. Right. And so the thing is, the terms and conditions will be above the scope of work in the order of precedence. So let's just say the scope of work says 7-day business payment, 7-day payment terms, but the terms say 30-day payment terms. The 30 days wins.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So that's hopefully that
So
answers your
basically,
question.
anything written below those terms can be superseded by the terms above it.
Exactly. That's why the terms are so important.
Right. And to me, I mean, I've read through all the contracts I've tendered on and won, what have you, and chosen not to go ahead with. And a lot of them have all of these terms in there, which kind of look like they're not necessarily important. They seem like a bunch of gobbledygook of, this is just a definition of this is just a definition of this. However, now I'm going to pay a bit more attention to that.
Yeah. So what you in a contract, the structure of the contract was just the first few pages will be the definition of terms, and then the rest of the contract is how, like, if you think about a contract, and this is how I view a contract, is I am sure that you can interpret drawing specifications, scopes of work better than the average layman, right? Obviously, it's what you do.
It's what we do. Yeah,
it's what you do. But also, and so that forms part of the contract, and so you're an expert in looking at these things. Now, you mightn't be an expert in every part of it, but you can interpret them.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is the terms and conditions is another document in the contract that you need to be able to interpret. So you need to, limitation of liability. How does that impact me? Termination. How does that impact me? Liquidated damages, consequential damages. How do they impact me? And once you understand them, you can have positions on each of these things, and you say, we as a company don't agree to these things because the risk is too much. Like, a lot of times you're playing a game where you are literally risking the whole business on this project. And so if you frame it like that, like when you know and you sit down and you go, okay, well, if you want to make that decision, Kenny, and I say to you, I reviewed your contract, and I go, look, Kenny, in the X, Y, and Z, if this happens, you could potentially be up for this amount of money, or you could lose the whole business. Consequential loss, for example, loss of profit is one. Your client's loss of profit could be more than the size of your company, right?
Yeah.
Probably is, realistically. So that's what okay, so if we look at the risk chart, low probability, high risk, right? Like, so low probability of happening, but high probability of, if it does happen, you're in big SH1T. And so it's looking at it like that, and then making your decisions from that point of view. And the ability to turn down work and say, no, I'm not doing that because the contract is too hard, is too aggressive, is very, very powerful. It's powerful in that you get a great reputation in the market for turning down work. You'll get a reputation for being professional. You know what you're talking about. You don't appear green, as in this is your first rodeo. They're like, oh god, these guys are switched on, right? Which makes you look as like a better company in their eyes.
Yeah. So all of those things, in doing that is from an interview perspective, would be better to the client than just turning up and agreeing to everything, and then it'll give them confidence if you turn around and be professional in that aspect.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, if you look at the biggest companies in your sector now, just interestingly, I know a roofing company in the States that's $1 billion company, just a roofing company. And so companies can scale to that level. Very, I'm not saying easily, but people have to think, if I can stay in business long enough, I can grow the company to that sort of size. So again, the key thing is, it's not about starting a business, it's about staying in business.
I love that. I think that's a brilliant ethos for all of that. So where do we move from here? Is there anything that you have that, in regard to horror stories that you've experienced with people that have just been really poor with their contracts, and just a story that you could share with us in regard to that? And then maybe after that, a hero story of someone who's put it in where they've come out the other side and been fine. I'm sure you've got lots of those with quantum contracts.
There's lots of stories. There's a lot of sad stories. I mean, there's the stories when I talk about, unfortunately, when I talk about the bad news stories, the war stories. A lot of war stories are, this bad thing happened, and then I overcome the obstacle, and then I came out on top. Unfortunately, the war story is in construction is, I went out of business. And so we like just looking at some of our clients, like we, over time, we we've had clients that left us for whatever reason, and like typically it's like we don't have enough work, or we're struggling to get work, so therefore we don't need your services. And so as part of our re-engagement program, right, we'd have our sales team reach back out to them to see, how they're doing. And an overwhelming amount don't exist anymore. They're gone.
Wow.
And so that is a huge thing. And so that's the reality, unfortunately. The upside of it is, statistically, and this is where if people don't have confidence to negotiate their contracts, like just take this statistic as the confidence that you could take, is that when we negotiate contracts for our clients, 82% of what we put forward gets approved. That's our average.
Wow.
across all of our clients. So we've got, I think at this stage, 130 odd clients across the world, different countries, different regions. So 82% gets approved. And so the game is they give you their worst contract, expecting you to negotiate. If you don't negotiate, they don't think that you're easy to do it. They think that you don't know how to play the game. This is your first time, and that is a red mark against you. It's not you're easy to deal with. If you negotiate in a professional way, very clearly what you're trying to achieve, it gives them confidence that you know what you're doing. So that's the negotiating contracts. In the post-award phase, our average client is saving about $100,000 from what they would have had to have employed internally to achieve the same. So that's just an internal cost metrics, and are getting twice the amount of variations, change orders, EOTs approved than they normally would have. Now, the statistics for disputes are a little bit hard to fathom. So our job is to avoid disputes and stop disputes happening, because if you get into a dispute, it's a race to see who loses the least amount of money. That's it. No one wins. We all know the only people that wins are the consultants. And so we want to avoid disputes at all costs. My best analogy for a dispute is, imagine you're driving along in your car, Kenny, and you stop at a traffic light and someone rear ends you. They get out of the car and they say, "Sorry, Kenny, that was my fault." Right? And you're like, okay, well, he's admitted it's his fault. And, someone admitting that it's 100% their fault in a construction dispute is not a likely scenario to say that. But let's just say that it did happen. Even though they 100%, even in the car crash example, they 100% admit it, you are still at a loss, because you have to go and get taxis around the place. You got to get quotes. You got to spend time to get, everything quoted. You got to go to a panel beater. Maybe your light is broken. So you're out of action for a car for a period of time. That all costs you money. That's the first thing. Second thing is your car is not as valuable anymore because it's been crashed. You can't say it hasn't been crashed. So even though you came out and it wasn't your fault and you came out okay, you still lost money. And that's a dispute in construction. So even if you come out on top, you're still down money. But the reality is you'll never have a construction dispute where they say, I'm totally at fault. You'll have to meet in the middle. So again, you're losing even more money. And so if we can avoid disputes at all costs, that makes a huge difference. So I can't give you stats about the amount of disputes that we have avoided, because that's hard to quantify.
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
But I'm pretty confident that the way we work is that the amount of disputes I have are significantly lower.
Right. But certainly, I know the feeling that the negotiating with principal contractors, it feels that you come into, say, for example, in roofing, I'm on a project at the moment where I went up on the roof this morning and I stated, hey, the air conditioning guys have actually put the pipe through the roof in a really good position. We don't need to go put dry pans through from the top, which they'd asked us to do. And I thought that, okay, we have to allow for these. I've missed that from the contract, but we've got to allow for them. And I said to the builder, you don't need to put them in. And he goes, oh, well, that's going to be cheaper for us. And I said, well, I'd allowed for them. I wasn't going to charge you for them. He goes, oh, no, we were expecting you to charge me for them. So I was in a mental state of thinking we were going to have to negotiate, or I was going to have a loss rather than have to go into dispute, which you try to avoid like the plague.
Yeah.
And in the end, we both win because they're not having to pay any more money and it's not costing us any more money. And so we avoided that. So I wanted to share that with you just then, because that's essentially a good upside from that. I can't stand disputes. I would lose money every day of the week before going into a dispute. I just go, okay, I didn't allow for that, so I'm just going to shut up and do my job.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a great strategy, is to avoid disputes at all costs. Honestly, it is. It's better for relationships. It's better for absolutely everything.
Righty-ho. So, is there anything else? So, points that I've got here in my little schedule is that from this point, what 3 to 5 points could you give to our listeners that I know you've probably gone through here in all of that heap? You've already put heaps of nuggets of gold in there and some silver as well. And what could you say? Like, it just says dot points essentially, that if you were and I'll use myself for an example, a roofing and cladding company, we do projects with tier 2 companies. We don't do union type projects, don't do tier 1, and we get big contracts given to us as well. We work for mums and dads, and we work for small builders that just give us project purchase orders. Our way of managing the contracts is basically, we get the contract, we look through it, we cross off what we don't agree with, that we understand, and sign it and send it back. Very basic. I don't read. I haven't been reading the purchase orders to make sure that what they give us is exact. I do briefly read through them. Though because we're just busy. We're not necessarily all over them. So as some advice that we could implement ourselves, and I know that we could definitely just come to you, Cian, and say, hey, sort our systems out, and I'm sure we'll be doing that. What's some pointers that will help us just walk in the right direction to help us understand and not get burnt with, say, the $200,000, $300,000 contract, the $30,000 contract, and then working for mums and dads? And especially, we haven't touched on mums and dads, so something with them that would be good as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So I give you the brief synopsis as to how to not work with Quantum. Okay, this is right. No, seriously,
that was brilliant. I loved it.
So what you want to do is there's two things you can do. First of all, we got if you just Google YouTube, my name, Cian Brennan, on YouTube, you'll find a YouTube channel. There's a playlist there, and it runs through every point in the contract. It's called Contract Negotiation. Everything that you need is in there. If you don't understand the points of the contract, go there, watch those videos. There's like 16 of them. It'll take you a while to get through them, but they're in there, have examples, and that's all free. So then you're downloaded on what you need to look for and what you're doing. So that's there. The second thing I would do is, if you got a good construction lawyer, right now, just from a money point of view, do you want to be paying a lawyer every single time you're reviewing the contract? No, it'll cost you $4 or $5 grand every single time, right? So I don't think that's the way to go about doing it, because it makes the 20 grand job not worthwhile, right?
100%.
So how do we get around that, right? So I would invest a lawyer to go to a lawyer, in a construction lawyer, and on a one-time thing. And you say to him, what I want to do is, here's my worst contract that I've been given, big gnarly contract. And I want to create a set of commercial principles for my company based on, let's go through this, and where do I stand? What is my position on each of these items? Okay. So then he'll help you do that. Then you got a set of commercial principles where you stand on each one of these items. And then that's it. You've paid. Now you have this document. This document that you now use when you're submitting your proposal, right? You say on your proposal, my proposal is based on the acceptance of these commercial principles. Right? You don't give them your terms and conditions, because you got that thing if they come over the top with their terms and conditions. And so you go based on this. And so it gets there, and you get to the purchase order stage, and you go, hey, just letting you know that this is based on our acceptance of these things, which means we need to change the purchase order. Then you can use that as an excuse to change the purchase order terms and conditions, because they've agreed to your proposal. That's one, right? That'll sort you out there. With the big contracts that you have, where it's not just a purchase order, it's a big proper contract where they're giving you a contract to review. Again, same sort of philosophy, but you obviously have to negotiate those points yourself up front. Okay, so that there's
Yeah.
a bit of skill involved now. That's a little bit more difficult, but you know what to ask for, and you can speak intelligently because you're saying these are our commercial principles. So
Yeah.
that helps again.
Which is the document you got from your lawyer.
Which is the document you got from a lawyer. So
Yeah.
now but you just got to do all of this yourself, and you got to try and
Yes,
negotiate that. That's the hard bit. Then for mom and pops, if mom and pops is you will probably give them a contract to sign.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is in the front end, you got to go to that lawyer again, and you go, okay, now that I have come up with this, I want you to draft me a contract that has all of my best interests in place. And then you give that contract to your mom and pop guy to sign. Now you want to make that small. You don't like you can still achieve everything you want, but it needs to be small. There's two things you can do if you're doing it like an e-signature sort of thing. You can have a link to our terms and conditions that you're accepting, and that link could be on your website, and it could be longer there. That's a way to protect your interest, get yourself sorted in that scenario.
Okay.
Okay.
And so then you flip that to the other side, and that is doing it, not working with Quantum.
That's it. That's how you do it yourself. That's it.
Yeah,
That's the whole show.
Working with Quantum.
Working with Quantum, you would just send us in your contract, and we would review it. We'd point out absolutely everything that you need to be worried about, and we'd prepare the negotiation document for you.
Right. So that was a one-line sentence.
Pretty much. Like we'll do the whole thing for you. We do the commercial principles thing for you, and it's just 100% done. And I guess our skill set is because we've done so many of these contract reviews, we know how to negotiate them to get them over the line. So your end result is where you want to be.
Yeah. Well, essentially, that first section that we just spent the last 5 minutes talking about, my head was starting to go, hey, I'm a roofer, and I see myself as being a bit, well, I'm quite capable at the contracts and all the things. My head started to explode.
Okay.
and then flip to the other side where you had a 2-line sentence. Go, well, that makes things easier. Like so far, we've done quite well in what we do. However, the cost, especially with inflation, the cost of these contracts that used to be $100,000 are now $200,000,
yep.
or were $200,000 now $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and our cash flow hasn't grown in that same speed.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see that not having to worry about that and just go on doing what we do and being good at that.
Yep.
I can see how that would be beneficial over not sleeping at night.
Yeah. I mean, the option as you grow as a company is to start hiring contracts people in your business to do this for you as well. Obviously, of course, that's I'm just talking about you doing that yourself, but you could hire people in-house to do it as well.
And I'm sure the more, yeah, well, that's right. If we're doing more, we like I said, mums and dads, builders, and then we've got, say, the defense work that we do with builders, with principal contractors. We spread our fingers as wide as we can. So if we get burnt, it only gets burnt a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Utilizing proper contract methods and negotiating to the riskier ones would essentially be like adding another finger on.
Yep.
So we're not burning our fingers. If we do, it'll only be minimal. It's like that's essentially what you're saying in all of this.
Yeah, that's it. You got to have a longer term perspective and understand that risk is silent. You don't feel the impact of risk if something goes good. Something goes well, nothing happens. Right. So that's kind of a feeling. It's kind of like insurance, right? It's almost exactly like insurance in that if the thing doesn't happen, great, but I didn't feel that. But if the bad thing happens, then you feel the bad thing if you haven't got yourself covered. And so that's the protection that you're looking for.
Right. Yeah. I think that's awesome. The fact that you mentioned before about the long-term goal, being in business is to stay in business. And I've worked for myself since I was 22, but in the company that I'm in now for the last 11 years. And I've always gone off, hey, you learn from your mistakes. But I know that I've repeated mistakes when we're really busy. And we're really busy when we're on the big contracts where if we don't perform, we're going to get burnt.
Yep.
So I see complete value in, like, when we caught up on LinkedIn, I was like, wow, I want to know more. And this has been absolutely fantastic knowing about all these things. And that long-term goal, I don't have a vision in my company to grow it to a point where I can turn around and sell the company. It's what my accountant calls a lifestyle business. We're in a business to be in business. And I love being in business. I don't want to go and be in another business. That's not how it is. So that whole point of, if you just keep trying to do the next right thing, I got that from Frozen 2 from Disney, trying to do the next right thing, you end up being bigger and bigger and bigger, or growing and being stronger, because you become more professional and you've actually learned and implemented strategies along the way that stop you from being that. What was that statement you said? When you go in with the cheapest price, it's the race for who's going to go out of business first.
Yeah, pretty much. Or someone's always willing to go out of business quicker than you.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right.
So one thing to consider is oh, I've lost it. It's gone. Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Well, look, we've covered heaps today, and I'm really excited with what we've done. One of the things that I ask on our podcast is what your favorite part of your home is and why.
Can I say people? I guess not.
I guess say whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I think obviously we have, because I've been in like construction. We lived in the Middle East. We lived in Qatar, Saudi. I've been in Iraq, Australia. I'm obviously Irish. The business is in the US. So much moving. So I would have to consider home to be more of a concept than a building. And so, yeah, it is just favorite part of my home is my three women, one woman, two girls. So that's always been a constant. So it's nice to have a business where obviously I'm up super early and up late with different time zones, but I always get to have breakfast and dinner with my family.
That's beautiful. That's and for one dad to another, that's amazing. That home is the people. It's not the building.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd imagine then you just nailed it. It's breakfast and dinner.
Yeah, breakfast and dinner.
So your kitchen dining room area is your place.
Yeah. The family dinner. We try our best to have. It doesn't always work out, but we try our best to have a family dinner every night.
That's a principle I share as well. We all sit down at the table and do that. So that's great to share that value with you, Cian.
Listen, very nice to be on the podcast, Kenny.
Yeah, with you as well. Thank you so much. I've got one more thing before we go. And answered the question. You got one thing you mentioned. You are a dad.
Yes.
And so I love I got given for Father's Day dad jokes in a tin. Oh. So I thought let's just throw this one out to finish it. And this is very, very suitable for the podcast that we have right now. If you have 13 apples in one hand and 10 oranges in the other hand, what do you have?
I don't know.
Massive hands.
Very good, very good. There's two American guys on TikTok where they just sit in this like ice thing and they just tell each other dad jokes. It's very, very funny. And I don't TikTok, but my wife and daughters laugh at me that I use YouTube Shorts, which was TikTok. Yeah, TikTok 2 months ago, basically. And so like, oh yeah, you saw that joke. Now we saw that like 2 months ago, and I'm like, whatever.
Yeah. No, I'm a YouTube Shorts. I've recently gone. Gary Vee said I had to get in. Watching Gary Vee said you got to get on TikTok because otherwise you're missing a certain market.
100%.
So it's a whole different thing. Well, mate, it's been awesome. Great to get to know you as a person, and great to see your journey and what you're doing. And we'll definitely be talking again soon.
Sounds good, Kenny. Take it easy.